In a kingdom where power reigned supreme and justice seemed a distant dream, one prince's insatiable lust would ignite a rebellion that would change everything. When the cries of 1,000 abandoned children echoed through the palace halls, the villagers rose to demand justice. But could a man who had taken so much ever truly atone for his sins? This is the story of the Prince of 1,000 Children, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the unyielding power of the people. In the heart of a vast and fertile land, surrounded by towering mountains and winding rivers, lay the kingdom of Zorivia. It was a land of abundance, where the fields were lush with crops, the rivers teemed with fish, and the mountains hid veins of gold and precious gems. The people of Zorivia were hard-working and proud, but they lived under the shadow of a monarchy that grew more corrupt with each passing generation. At the center of the kingdom stood the grand palace of Zorivia, a sprawling complex of marble and gold that glittered in the sunlight. It was here that the royal family resided, ruling over the land with an iron fist. The current king, Malik, was a man of great power but little wisdom. He had inherited the throne from his father, who had been a just and fair ruler, but Malik was more interested in maintaining his own wealth and status than in the welfare of his people. Malik had one son, Prince Jafar, who was the apple of his eye. Jafar was everything Malik had ever wanted in an heir: handsome, charming, and cunning. But beneath the prince's charming exterior lay a dark and twisted soul. Jafar had grown up in the lap of luxury, spoiled and indulged by his father, who had never denied him anything. As a result, Jafar had developed a sense of entitlement that knew no bounds. He believed that the world existed solely for his pleasure, and he took whatever he wanted without a second thought. Prince Jafar's favorite pastime was seducing young women. He had a particular taste for virgins, whom he saw as the ultimate conquest. Every night, he would send his guards out into the villages surrounding the palace to find the most beautiful young women. They would be brought to the palace under the guise of being chosen for a special honor, but in reality, they were nothing more than playthings for the prince. Jafar would wine and dine the girls, showering them with compliments and promises of a life of luxury. He would make them feel like they were the most important person in the world, but by morning, he would cast them aside like used toys. The girls would be sent back to their villages, their hearts broken and their innocence stolen. Jafar never gave them a second thought. At first, the girls kept silent. They were ashamed of what had happened to them and afraid of the consequences if they spoke out. Who would believe them? The prince was the most powerful man in the kingdom, and his word was law. But as time went on, the girls began to notice changes in their bodies. They felt sick in the mornings, and their bellies began to swell. They were pregnant with the prince's children. The girls tried to hide their pregnancies, covering their growing bellies with loose clothing and avoiding the prying eyes of their families and neighbors. But as the months passed, it became impossible to hide the truth. The villagers began to notice that more and more young women were giving birth to babies without fathers. The whispers started, and soon the truth began to spread. One night, an old woman named Nana, who was known for her wisdom and kindness, gathered the young women in secret. She had heard the whispers and wanted to know the truth. "My daughters," Nana said gently, "tell me what has happened to you. Who is the father of your children?" The women hesitated, tears filling their eyes. But then, one by one, they began to speak. "It was the prince," one girl said, her voice trembling. "The prince," whispered another. "The prince," they all said, as if breaking a terrible spell. Nana's eyes darkened with anger. One or two girls, perhaps a mistake. But 1,000. This is not just evil. This is a crime against us all. The news spread like wildfire through the villages. The elders called a great meeting, and the entire village gathered to hear the young women's stories. The air was thick with anger and disbelief as the girls spoke of their shame and betrayal. "This is not just our shame," one woman cried. This is the prince's shame. The villagers were furious. How dare the prince treat their daughters this way? How dare he leave them with children to raise alone? The men clenched their fists, and the women wept for their daughters' lost innocence. One man, a blacksmith named Karim, stood up. He was a strong and fearless man, known for his sense of justice. Enough is enough, he said. If the prince will not take responsibility, we will make him face the truth. And so, a great plan was made. The villagers would march to the palace and demand justice. They would bring the children with them, as proof of the prince's crimes. They would not be silenced any longer. On the night of the next full moon, the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest. The women carried their babies in their arms, while the men carried torches and weapons. The air was thick with tension as they began their march to the palace. The palace guards saw them coming from a distance and ran to warn the prince. "My lord," one of the guards shouted as he burst into the prince's chambers. "The villagers are coming. And they bring children." Prince Jafar, who had been lounging on his silk-covered bed, laughed. "Children? What do I care for children?" The guard hesitated. "My lord, they say they are all your children." The prince's smile froze. What nonsense is this? But before he could say more, the palace doors burst open, and the villagers flooded into the grand hall. The women stood at the front, each holding a child, while the men stood behind them, their eyes burning with fury. For the first time in his life, Prince Jafar felt fear. Karim, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "Prince Jafar," he said, his voice like thunder. "You have fathered 1,000 children and abandoned them. Tonight, you face judgment." The prince tried to laugh, but no sound came. His hands trembled as he looked around the room. He saw the faces of the women he had wronged, the children he had abandoned, and the villagers who had once revered him. He looked to his father, the king, who sat frozen on his throne, his face pale with shock. One of the mothers stepped forward and placed her child on the ground. "Come," she said. "Come see your father." Another mother did the same, and then another. One by one, they placed their babies before the prince. The room filled with the cries of 1,000 children, a deafening sound that echoed off the marble walls. The prince backed away, shaking his head. This is madness," he whispered. Nana, the old woman, stepped forward. "Madness," she said. "No, Prince Jafar. Madness is what you did to these women. Madness is thinking you could take and take, without consequence." The prince looked to his father, desperate for help, but the king only lowered his head. He had spoiled his son too much. He had let this happen. The villagers stepped closer, their anger palpable. "What will you do now, my prince?" one of the fathers asked. "Will you abandon your own blood? Or will you take responsibility?" The prince's knees buckled, and he fell to the floor. I cannot. I never meant." Karim grabbed him by his fine silk collar. "You never meant for us to find out," he roared. "You never meant to be caught." The prince stammered. "Please, have mercy." "Mercy?" Nana's eyes flashed. "Did you show mercy to these women?" The prince turned to his father, desperate. "Father, say something." The king stood, his voice heavy with regret. "You have shamed this kingdom, Jafar." He looked at the villagers, then at the weeping mothers. "From this night forward, you are no longer my heir." Gasps filled the hall. "No. Father, please. You will take responsibility for every child," the king continued. "You will raise them, feed them, clothe them. You will be a father to them all. And you will never again touch a woman without love and respect." The villagers nodded in agreement, their anger slowly giving way to a sense of justice. The prince collapsed, his life of luxury and privilege crumbling around him. His crimes had caught up with him, and there was no escape. From that day forward, Prince Jaffa's life changed forever. Stripped of his title and his wealth, he was forced to live among the villagers and take responsibility for the children he had fathered. He worked alongside the people he had once looked down upon, tending to the fields, repairing homes, and caring for the children. At first, Jaffa struggled with his new life. He was unused to hard work and the demands of fatherhood. But as time passed, he began to change. He learned the names of each child, listened to their laughter, and felt the weight of their love and trust. He began to understand the pain he had caused and the lives he had shattered. The villagers, too, began to see a change in the prince. He was no longer the arrogant and selfish man they had once despised. He was humble, hard-working, and devoted to the children. Slowly, they began to forgive him, though they never forgot what he had done. Years passed, and the kingdom of Zorobaiah began to heal. The children grew up strong and healthy, loved by their mothers and cared for by the men who had once abandoned them. Jaffa, now an old man, looked back on his life with regret but also with a sense of redemption. He had learned the true meaning of love and responsibility, and he had spent the rest of his days trying to make amends for his sins. The kingdom never forgot the story of the prince who had fathered 1,000 children and the villagers who had demanded justice. It became a cautionary tale, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that no one is above the consequences of their actions. And in the hearts of the children, though they had once been abandoned, they found a father who had learned, too late, what it meant to love. As the sun set over the kingdom of Zorobaiah, the villagers gathered in the square to celebrate the harvest. The children, now grown, danced and sang, their laughter filling the air. Jaffa, now an old man with a long white beard, sat on a bench, watching them with a smile. Nana, the old woman who had once led the charge for justice, sat beside him. "You have come a long way, Jaffa," she said. The former prince nodded. "I have. And I owe it all to you and the people of this village. You showed me the error of my ways and gave me a chance to make amends." Nana patted his hand. "It is never too late to change, Jaffa. Never too late to do the right thing." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the villagers lit a bonfire, and the celebration continued. The kingdom of Zorobaiah, once shrouded in darkness, had found a new dawn, thanks to the courage and determination of its people. And Jaffa, the prince who had once been lost, had finally found his way home. No man is above the consequences of his actions. Power without responsibility leads to downfall. And justice, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way home.